sorry, I'm having some trouble with the camera, or I would show my face here. But thanks for joining. Happy solstice. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about a shift that's happening in the way that we heal, particularly as we move into the Aquarian age. The topic of the talk is really holistic health in the Aquarian age. And so I think as we're talking about that, it's really important first to consider what it means to heal holistically. What does this term holistic mean? I'm not sure about you, but if I look at my Instagram feed or I look at the marketing ads coming through my email, I can find a lot of things that claim to be holistic that really have complete disregard for the whole. And so when we're talking about holistic, really what we're talking about is, or with regard to healing, it's really about the self. And so when I think about this, I think about really the concept of the self and the whole of the self as a dynamic phenomenon, right? So, like if we talk about the whole of the self from the perspective of the root chakra, we're talking about the physical body. If we're looking from the perspective of the sacral, it's inclusive of the emotional field. As we move up to the solar plexus, then the mind becomes involved in the whole of self. When we move into the heart, it becomes, how far can we detect that electromagnetic field of the heart, truly like our presence, right? That becomes part of the whole. We move up to the throat, and it's how far can my voice be heard, right? If I can scream, then like that vibration of my sound, that's part of the whole. And so on and so forth. We go up to the third eye, and it becomes about my inner vision. How far into the past can I see? How far into the future can I see? And then when we get into the crown, from that perspective, there's no separation, right? So everything is the whole, inclusive of the cosmos, the sun and the moon and the stars and the constellations, right? This is where concepts of astrology and archetype come into how we work with our health. So I think that's the first concept that I think is really important to clear up is just when we're talking about holism and something that's holistic, we're really being clear about what of the whole are we talking about? Where are the boundaries of that? And, you know, where does the whole from myself as a practitioner with the work that I'm doing, where does the whole end? And so, because I'm giving this talk, I'm going to share a little bit about the way I work with the whole, what holistic health means to me right now. And, I look at the self as really having these four distinct quadrants: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. So for me, when I'm working with people on their health or self, whichever term you want to use, I'm really thinking about all four of those quadrants and how each one of those quadrants of self relates to the world, relates to reality, and relates to ourselves. So, the topic here, we're really talking about this shift. I started practicing medicine in 2011, and I remember when I started practicing, and I came to conventional medicine as a naturopathic doctor, as a nurse practitioner, as a yogi of 20 years, as a Reiki master. I already had sort of, a more integrative perspective on things. And when I came into a conventional environment, I remember people coming to my office with depression, anxiety, and suggesting things like meditation or mindfulness or contemplative practices, lifestyle changes before moving to medication. And back in 2011, this isn't that long ago, people were not happy with this recommendation. People laughed at me, people insulted me, people walked out of my office. And over the last, decade or more that I've been practicing, I've seen a really big shift in how open people are to these is often called alternative modalities. They're becoming way more mainstream. And I think part of that is because we're living at this really interesting time in human evolution, in a change in consciousness, which is the turning of the astrological ages. And, the cosmic clock has a much grander perspective than our wristwatches do. So, when we talk about the turning of the ages, this dawning of the age of Aquarius that, some of us are familiar with from that hit song in the 60s or 70s. I'm not exactly sure when that was, but this change is really gradual. It happens over generations. No one really knows the exact, year or month or day that the age turns from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. But we're in each one of these ages for about 2,160 years. It's a long period of time. So, I give that background just to say that as I talk about how this concept of holistic health is changing from my perspective, this isn't something that's happening overnight where, like, all of a sudden in 2030, you're going to walk into a doctor's office and, they're going to be waving tuning forks around or doing energy work. It's not like that. It's a very subtle change. But so I want to talk a little bit more about my perspective of how I see it changing. And, most of my life, and probably a lot of you who are listening, uh, growing up in the West, there is a very, very distinct medical paradigm. And if you look at the diagram that I wanted to show you, although I'm having trouble with the camera, but you can find it all over my Instagram or my website, which is at Experience Seven Senses or experiencesevensenses.com. You'll see I have this image of a circle with four quadrants: physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional. And the physical and the mental are on one side of the circle. And the way I see it is in the past, for the entirety of my lifetime, and maybe even a generation or two or more before I was born, this is really where we've been more comfortable as um, in terms of the dominant paradigm of medicine, at least in the West. And this isn't surprising. This is like, it helps us feel safe to have expert opinions and evidence-based medicine. And, basically, I would call this side of the diagram the seen world as opposed to the unseen, right? These are like provable, reproducible, rational, mind-pleasing types of things. I remember when I was in practice in the conventional setting, it was always very easy for me to get the state to grant disability to someone who had a broken leg or a very physical medical condition. But it was much more difficult when it was extended grief, right? Or if it was panic attack. Uh, Medicine, or at least Western medicine, is much more comfortable with the seen world, or in other words, things that we can perceive with our senses. Right? So I call this in my diagram the masculine or the yang side of the diagram. And I use some arrows to show that sensation is really the language of the physical body, and sensation has this way of drawing our attention in, and our thoughts and beliefs are really the language of the mental experience, and we use our thoughts and beliefs to project our reality outward. Okay, so much of the way that we heal holistically in during the Piscean age, it was like this idea that the mind and body connection is really profound. It's really real. And it is, right? This is the placebo effect or the nocebo effect, right? We know this work from evidence-based medicine. There's plenty of data that supports the fact that if I believe, a medication to be effective, that it's likely going to be more effective than a medication or some intervention that I believe is quackery or not real. So this mind body connection has been a real sort of like growth area to come out of the age of Pisces. We've also had great advances in medicine in the age of Pisces, and evidence-based medicine and data and expert opinions and epidemiology and pharmacology. They've really done a lot of wonderful things for us, and they've moved us out of a time in history where infectious disease and acute illness was often uh, costing us lives. But where we're going, where I see us going as the age turns and as we move more into the age of Aquarius, is into the unseen realms. And so in my diagram, this is the spiritual and emotional quadrants of health. And this is the mystery. A lot of the time in more conventional areas of medicine, and even in more integrative areas of medicine, where you see people branching out and using functional medicine or choosing supplements over uh, pharmaceuticals or using lifestyle interventions, a lot of this stuff is still rooted in evidence. It's still rooted in studies, and people feel safe. People feel like we know the risks of these things. But when you get into these more spiritual or emotional quadrants of self, it's like, it's sort of like the dark night of the soul. It's like we have to trust because there are elements of these types of modalities or these areas of our well being that are unproven. So, don't get me wrong, in a holistic system, all four of these quadrants are important. And sometimes we really need the foundation of safety. We really need what we get from those physical and mental quadrants to be able to launch into the darkness, into the unseen realms, into the mystery. They're both important, and I'd say they're both important regardless of what age we're talking about. But really, what I'm speaking to is the fact that, at least in my private practice, what I see is more and more people are being drawn to modalities or ways of healing that are more of the water and the air elements, energy work, chakra work, feeling their emotions, inner child work, right? Time traveling. Inner child work is time traveling. Shadow work, right? Directly and intentionally going into the darkness, trying to find your blind spots and excavate what you've been too afraid to look at, right? We're seeing more and more of this, at least I am in my perspective. And I think a lot of people, particularly in the more conventional medical world, tend to fear these quadrants, right? Because we can't prove them. And at least in the United States, liability is a real thing, right? If someone comes into your office with a, a cancer or, some sort of metastatic process, you're liable if you tell them to go try Reiki, right? As opposed to sending them to the oncologist. So we're definitely not in a place yet where these things are mainstream in all areas, but it's sort of where we're moving. We're moving into these unseen realms and into these more sort of esoteric and mysterious aspects of our healing. A lot of other things are changing too. The age of Aquarius is a lot about transparency. It's a lot about equality, right? So whereas in the past, uh, certain forms of medical treatment, you need a trained professional with a prescription pad. You need someone who's gone through 10 years of training to tell you to do a neti pot when your allergies are acting up, right? And we're moving away from that. We're in the age of information. We're moving toward the fact that information and knowledge is accessible to everyone. So that's really changing. It's changing how we heal. We're less reliant on, going to others who have more experience maybe or more training. And we're more likely to turn into our inner resources and our outer resources, which might just be the internet and technology and our communities. So we're going to see a lot of movement from, trained experts and specialists to coaches who have healed themselves, who have had deep personal experiences. We're moving from being more comfortable in the seen realms to more comfortable in the unseen realms. Uh, so this shift from, physical, mental, and it's not completely a shift. It's just where the pendulum has swung very far in one direction in, recent generations, right? And I don't know if a lot of you experienced this with your parents' generation or older generations, but there was this idea among my parents where you just trust what the doctor says, right? You don't ask questions, you don't do your own research. They're the expert, and you just take their expert opinion and have blind faith in it, which is really interesting because so much of I think an interesting theme in the age of Pisces and in recent generations has been that science and religion are like two different things. That science and data is a separate belief system than faith, right? When in fact, like both of those are belief systems. It's just a matter of what you believe in, what you trust. And when it comes to healing, what makes you feel safe? So as we shift here, and I know my time is coming up to a close pretty quickly, but as we shift here, I'd encourage you to really start to think about these changes in how we heal.